Everyone, we're excited to have so many of you join us today as we talk about restoring voting rights for those who have been formerly incarcerated. My name is Kelly Olson, and I'm formerly incarcerated and the policy manager for Civil Survival Project. And I am excited to be here tonight on behalf of the Washington Voting Rights Restoration Coalition. Our coalition is a community of people and organizations who are seeking justice for our families and neighbors impacted by our criminal legal system. We're a coalition that supports the restoration of voting rights to those formerly incarcerated in order to support their successful reintegration into our community. We are committed to supporting legislation that aligns with our collective values of humanity, empowerment, racial equity, inclusion, and a free democracy. Tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about the history and roots of felony disenfranchisement in our country. We're going to hear from local and national individuals who have been disenfranchised, learn more about the bill going forward in the legislature, which in the simplest of terms, restores the right to vote to any individual who is not currently incarcerated. And most importantly, we are going to talk about how you can get involved and join us in this fight. So right now, I'd like to introduce you to our guests and moderator for the evening. So tonight we'll be hearing from Desmond Meade. Desmond is a formerly homeless returning citizen who overcame many obstacles to eventually become the president of the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, chair of the Floridians for a Fair Democracy, a graduate of Florida International University College of Law, a Ford Global Fellow, and a published author of Let My People Vote, which I have right here. I had the pleasure of meeting Desmond earlier this year in Atlanta. Recognized by Time Magazine as one of the 100 most influential people in the world in 2019, Desmond led the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition to a historic victory in 2018 with the successful passage of Amendment 4, a grassroots citizens initiative which restored voting rights to over 1.4 million Floridians with past felony convictions. Amendment 4 represented the single largest expansion of voting rights in the United States in a half a century and brought an end to 150 years of Jim Crow era laws in Florida, Jim Crow era law in Florida. We have David Hepburn, who's the executive of the Freedom Project. David knows firsthand the impacts of mass incarceration after being incarcerated at 16 years old with a de facto life sentence. Due to his juvenile status, when he was convicted and the passage of the 5064 bill, he was released after 24 years of confinement. He now works toward developing partnerships with other community providers whose mission is in alignment with making advancements in criminal justice and prison reform. He's also a Credible Messenger, which is a national initiative of adult men and women from similar backgrounds who equip young people with the tools to heal their lives and provide them with a living example of hope and transformation. He's on the board of What's Next Washington, which believes every person has a right to a life of dignity and right to full participation in society with an emphasis on stripping away the barriers and employment for those with conviction histories. We have Thomas Giorgio. Thomas is the president of the Student Veterans at the University of Washington, Tacoma, where he works full-time in the Veteran Services Office and is also a full-time student. He's also involved with a local nonprofit supporting veterans experiencing homelessness and struggling in the criminal justice legal system. We also have Brittany Lovely. Brittany is a statewide reentry council coordinator, justice advocate, and directly impacted woman. She's a recent graduate of Washington State University in Vancouver, Washington, where she achieved her bachelor's in public affairs with a concentration in justice. It was there that she further developed her keen interest in law, public policy, and legislative process, but she had always been consumed with a desire to reform the systems that threaten her community. Those are going to be our panelists, and our moderator is Representative-elect Tara Simmons. I'm going to let Tara introduce herself and share just a little bit about her background and her journey to becoming the first formerly incarcerated elected official in a state office in our state and we think across the country. Tara, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you if you can talk a little bit about yourself. And again, we're so excited to have everybody here tonight.
Thank you, Kelly. It is such an honor to be here with all of my people tonight, and to be in this position to where we're going to be able to get this done this year finally. For those that don't know, I am Representative-elect Tara Simmons from the 23rd Legislative District here in Kitsap County, covering Bremerton, Paulsbo, Silverdale, Bainbridge Island, and other parts of unincorporated Kitsap County. You know, just even being here is just so humbling, right? I, like so many of my family here in this space with me tonight, you know, struggled a lot throughout my childhood, have an ACEs score of 10, you know, started going to juvenile detention at 12 years old. I think the first time I was convicted, it was for shoplifting because, you know, my family was selling our food stamps for crack cocaine. And so I came from, you know, generations of poverty and violence. And I'm a survivor of crime first. I always want to make sure people don't put me into a binary identity because I am formerly incarcerated, but I started being trafficked at 11 years old. And so I, you know, come to this work through a lot of lived experience. The last time I was in prison was I was released in 2013. But have been in and out of the system many times in multiple systems, foster care and in prison. And when I got out in 2013, I realized that I had little hope or opportunity. I was working, you know, for a minimum wage job, trying to reunite with my children, couldn't find, you know, any opportunity for housing, had to go homeless for a while, and I was surrounded by a community of people in recovery, because finally got into recovery from my substance use disorder and recognized that people were there 15, 20 years and still couldn't find a place to live or get a decent job. So I decided I was going to either go back to crime or I was going to figure out how to change the system. And, you know, going back to crime and going back to prison wasn't something that I could do when I have children to, you know, try to save also. And so I decided to go to law school and to figure out how to change the system. And that's what kind of started my journey. About 14 months after I got out of prison, I started at Seattle University School of Law, and I've been fighting ever since. During my second year of law school, I co-founded the Civil Survival Project that organizes other formerly incarcerated people to use our stories to make change down in Olympia at the state capitol. I was appointed by the governor to the statewide reentry council and the public defense advisory board, and now I serve on the sentencing task force as well. Actually, I just resigned from the sentencing task force because of my new position. But you know, it didn't matter what I did. I graduated law school, and you know, they still wouldn't let me sit for the bar exam because of my past. And because of my community, both here in Washington and nationally, we were able to fight to the state Supreme Court and get that decision overturned. And I was able to become an attorney. So now today I'm an attorney. I decided that I wanted to make a bigger change and not just work on criminal justice anymore, but also really get to the root cause of what leads us to being in cages. And that is, you know, lack of opportunity way earlier on. So I decided I wanted to run for office so I could work on a lot of different issues. But you know, this bill and this effort is something I've been working on for 3 years now. You know, as an advocate on the outside, organizing testimony, working with Senator Cooterer, who has been a champion for us the last 3 years. And it was something I really felt I should take on as my freshman bill. When you get to Olympia and you become an elected, there's all these, you know, cool little opportunities you have, and every kind of freshman, you know, they get extra support from their colleagues, and it's like a big team sport. And I felt like this policy had been developed over 3 years, and it was ripe to go, and it just needed some extra love. And so really happy that I was able to make this my freshman bill, and that all of you have done the work. You know, over the last year, the Voting Rights Coalition has been meeting weekly and educating so many people and really changing hearts and minds. And so as we're going into session starts on Monday, I'm feeling really positive that we're going to get it through the finish line this year. So, and you know, all this time I've been looking at my big brother over there, Desmond, who I, you know, have been able to get to know over the last few years in our national kind of work with the formerly incarcerated and convicted people and families movement, and in his role in the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, and through Just Leadership USA, and through so many different kind of national organizations that we work in. And he's been my inspiration and my hope, and sometimes who I call when I'm having a bad day, and has kept me encouraged. And so I can't give up. I'm going all in. And with that, I just really want to, it's such an honor that you're here with us tonight, Desmond. And I want to give you some time to talk about your story and how you've been impacted by voter disenfranchisement, and talk more about your work as well.
Wow. Well, first of all, it's definitely a pleasure being here, especially when you call, and this sounds so beautiful, Representative Simmons, right? Oh my God, that is like huge, and you talk about me inspiring you, Tara, you inspire me and countless other returning citizens throughout this country, and I thank God for you, and I am grateful that you've had the courage to fight through all of the obstacles, and I hear you tell your story, and there's so many parallels with my story and yours. I always start with me in 2005, really being at the lowest point of my life, and um, recently released from prison. I was addicted to drugs. I was homeless. I was in and out of prison. And on a fateful day in August of 2005, I ended up standing in front of railroad tracks, waiting on a train to come so I can jump in front of it. And I was at the lowest point of my life. I didn't see any light at the end of the tunnel or anything, and I was ready to go. I felt like I was a total disappointment to my family, to myself, to humanity, and it wasn't worth living another day. But the train didn't come, and I tell folks that God had other plans for me, and and I listening to you, Tara, I just can't help but to just get overjoyed again, because just thinking about what we've gone through and how God uses people who have gone through some painful moments and some trying moments, but those are the people that He used to bring about great change. And little did I know at that time, when I crossed that track, what I was really stepping into. I end up after crossing the track, walking a couple blocks and checking myself into drug treatment. After completing that, I moved into a homeless shelter. And while I was living there, I decided to go to school. And my only motivation at that time was, maybe by me going to school, I would not relapse and use drugs again. I wanted to do anything possible to stop that relapse from happening, because if I were to have relapsed and get in front of another set of railroad tracks this time, I probably wouldn't have been as lucky. And so I enrolled in college in a paralegal program, did extremely well. My professors encouraged me to continue my education, and I did. And I ended up obtaining a bachelor's degree. And I, like you, applied to law school and got accepted. And in May of 2014, I graduated with a law degree. However, unfortunately, I don't live in the state of Washington, right? I lived in the state of Florida, which basically told me that in spite of all that I've done, I am still a second-class citizen, and I'm not worthy of being treated with dignity or respect, and I'm not worthy of having my civil rights restored, and definitely not worthy of being able to vote. Even if your wife, like my wife, was running for office, and I couldn't even vote for her, because I lived in the state of Florida. And at its height, it was, I believe, 1.68 million people who could not do that. They were in the same boat as I was. And it was just something inherently wrong on two fronts. Number one, that there was a deep racist history of felon disenfranchisement that carried with it such a toxic amount of animus towards people of African descent. and that have been allowed to live in this country for quite some time. And then the other thing was the fact that in a situation in Florida was that at the end of the day, there were 4 politicians that ruled with an iron fist and decided which American citizen get to vote and which don't get to vote. That had to change. And so we did launch a ballot initiative and amendment, which was later named Amendment 4, to restore voting rights to 1.4 million individuals. And that journey in itself was transformational because number one, we did it different than other ballot initiatives in the past, and that it was a movement that was not based on hate, fear, division, but rather a movement that was based on love, and that uplifted the humanity of people with felony convictions and really connected those individuals with voters along the lines of love, right? And we were able to do have an amazing victory that garnered support from people from all walks of life and all political persuasions, where we even didn't have any major opposition to it. And in November of 2018, Love won the day, and we were able to pass Amendment 4. And it really one of the things, not only from that, but from other things even throughout the country. What I didn't even realize at the time was that movement created a chain reaction throughout the country and really inspired so many other directly impacted people because it empowered them in a few ways. But the most important way I thought was that it showed that people with previous felony convictions have the capacity, all right, to not only be a powerful change agents in their community, but have the capacity to be strategic thinkers and actually lead a movement, right? And so you see over the last 4 years, what happened in Louisiana with Amendment 2, what just happened this past November with Prop 17 in California, right? What happened in Florida, what happened in North Carolina with a great court victory around voting rights. That common thread was at the center of all of probably the biggest victories in the country were directly impacted people, were people with previous felony convictions, right there at the center leading it all. And so I didn't have a clue at the time what Amendment 4 meant on a national level, but I do now. And it gives me an even greater appreciation. And not only for Amendment 4, but for you, Representative Simmons, because what you're doing in Washington, what the coalition is doing in Washington, even though it has a direct impact on returning citizens living in the state of Washington, there's also an additional impact that will be felt throughout the country because folks are looking at what's going on in your state and are being inspired by the leadership, is being inspired by the gains. And I know that once this bill becomes law, that there are going to be so many other groups in various states that's going to say, give us a copy of that bill. We want to go ahead and pass that bill in our state as well. And so I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for the journey. I look back, and I'm pretty sure you, Tara, in most aspects, look back and seeing what we went through and have no regrets, because what we went through made us who we are today, right now. And that is people who are impacting this world in a major way.
Thank you so much, Desmond. You are and continue to be just an inspiration to all of us. And I definitely want to catch up with you soon and hear what else you're up to, because I know, you've just taken Amendment 4 as kind of one reform and effort, but now are using those same tactics and strategies to continue to make change for returning citizens down in Florida. So thank you so much for being with us tonight. And next, I want to welcome David Hepard to the panel. David is also equally inspiring to so many people in Washington who, have been and have survived the criminal legal system. David has a very, very compelling personal story of resilience. And, he was sentenced to de facto life, at a young age, and didn't let that stop him, though. Continued to, develop in prison, as a young child, and continue to develop, though, and do everything he could to change his life, not even knowing that he would ever come home. But thankfully, to other advocates working outside, we did find a way for David to come home, and so glad he's here. And now he's the director of the Freedom Project. So I would love for you to tell us more about the work of the Freedom Project, but also speak to your own history with voter disenfranchisement, and also, how race and racism in the criminal justice system is playing out in your life today and in voting rights.
Thank you, Tara. I really appreciate that. Rep. Simmons. That does flow, though. That flows a little bit. I really appreciate what Desmond said. That really stuck with me. Love wins the day. That really resonates with me, right? Right. That resonates with me because you really look at my story, and I feel like that's the story, right? Love wins the day. But the fact of the matter is, I come up in a lot of trauma. I come up in a lot of abuse, and I didn't have love, right? And that creates circumstances and situations where you bleed out. I'm bleeding out of my trauma. I gravitate toward gang culture because I felt like that's where I found my acceptance. That's where I found my love. And it was to put me in the circumstances where, I get thrown away, right? And I would say that I got thrown away when I was 16, and they gave me forever in the penitentiary. But to be honest, being historically marginalized in this society, I've always felt like I was thrown away. When I was a child going through school, I always felt othered. I was always a problem to be solved. I never had love or compassion or empathy ever poured into me. And really, that was my issue. And it wasn't until I got incarcerated and some volunteers came in and showed me empathy that it gave me the space to start to heal. And that's a powerful tool. I really say that in every space that I am. I try to anyway, that it's really empathy that is the transformative force that allows for people to heal and grow. I stopped saying that I changed. I used to have that type of verbiage. I used to say I changed here, I turned a corner, but I think that verbiage kind of implies that there's something broken or something wrong with me before, and then something had to change and to become a better person or somebody who somehow deserves to be free or deserves to be happy. And the reality is, I didn't change. I've always been the same person. You know what I mean? I was a traumatized child trying to deal with the circumstances and grew into a traumatized adult. But as I started to heal, now I'm able to show up authentically in the world. And this is who I always was, even when I didn't have a release date. Folks who was inside with me would tell you that as I started to heal, I started to really try to pour life into those around me, hoping, like Desmond said, that love would win the day. That's what it was. We had disconnection. And that's what's wrong with voting when you talk about voting and stuff and how they do with our voting rights. It's the same thing that, same reason why some people don't think we should vote or I should vote is the same thing that makes a person not want to rent a space to me. And the same thing that you don't want to hire me, right? I think it all sits into not wanting to, but not able to see my humanity, right? And I really believe that everything hinges in that piece right there of that I'm a person. That's why we like people first language. That's why we reject the framing that I was ever a convict or an inmate. I was always a person dealing with whatever circumstances that I had to. And if I'm going to be able to be successful when I get released, I have to be connected to my humanity. And what makes it difficult to connect to my humanity is the society refuses to see me and see my humanity, and refuses to rent to me and give me a place to stay and give me a job and give me basic rights like your ability to vote. I always thought it was funny that the two states in the union that you can vote, regardless if you're incarcerated or not, are the whitest states in the union, right? I always wondered, that always used to mess me up when I used to think about that. And I wondered, if all the states were white, would you be able to vote no matter where your circumstances were? I think about that. And I think about how the DNA of this country is steeped in oppressing Black and brown folks. And it's just real. And I think that for us to get our humanity back at this time and at this place, I think that we have to be able to advocate for ourselves and for others. And voting is an important piece of that. I used to do a lot of work in the community. I still do a lot of work I'm from the community, right? And I do all this work in the community and try to support, and we call our organization, I'm from the Freedom Project, and we say we're community centered. And the community really centers us and pushes us to what we need to be doing. And the reality is I can help somebody find housing, and I can help a person and give that type of emotional support that a person needs when they transition and out. But the reality is, what can we do about these other barriers, these laws and these policies that are in place, or these representatives and these legislators that can't see our humanity because their lived experience was a little bit different? How do we change that? And we change that with a vote, right? And so I really think that it's important for us to vote, and it's important that people get the access to vote. Because just looking at me and what I can do with my vote and what I've been able to do, and like Tara and Kelly and other people who are impacted, is people who are closest to the problem are closest to the solution. And I think these are the people you want in those rooms. You want a person, you want my perspective, because I could tell you the real perspective of how it feels to be oppressed and why that won't work. You know what I mean? When you're separated and you helicopter in with your solutions and you wonder why those solutions aren't working, and you've been doing these for 50, 60 years and why they haven't worked and they haven't taken hold in our community. And the reason is you have a bird's eye view of our problems, and you're not in our problems. You're not in it, so you don't have an idea of what the solutions are, because just like implicit biases, our solutions are implicit too, right? You can't see those because you don't have our lived experience. And I really believe that's why it's important. It's important that we vote, and it's important that they carve spaces for more of us to vote, because there's more power in that. And I really believe that this is our time to really advocate for our humanity. And so if we can do that, and if people can see our humanity and make it, and I'm always going to stay connected to the fact to be able to see other people's humanity. Just because you can't see mine doesn't mean I can't see yours. The reality is, if we can stay centered in that, I believe that the world can be the place that we want it to be. But if we still believe that there's good people and bad people belong caged away, and good people deserve the resources, then we'll always do what we've always been, and that is what it is. But with that being said, I hope that helps. I hope if you heard anything from what I've said, I hope the takeaway is that people don't change, they heal. And we could call the problem a lot of different things, but it all centered in the fact that we can't see each other's humanity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. I think that's so important. You know, I've been reflecting the last few days as I'm stepping into this new role, and I'm meeting all kinds of new people that I've not ever met before. And I think even, I have judgments and around, like, wealthy people and people who, vote in ways that I don't agree with, or and I've really been digging into this thing about humanity too, and saying to myself, well, like, how better am I for judging them and not trying to see their humanity and not trying to build bridges to help our neighbors? I need to challenge myself. And I just love what you're talking about, because it is true. We are all like kind of complex human beings with so many different layers and nuances, and leaning into that humanity is how I think we are going to make a difference, right? So thank you for your words, David. Thomas, I am so grateful that you're here tonight too. I would love to, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself to our guests and sharing more about your story, and also about the work that you currently do, and also, talking about your time in the military and how it's felt, to be a veteran who has experienced voter disenfranchisement. Thank you.
Sarah, thank you so much, and everyone for being here today. Everyone for tuning in. Just my heart is swollen right now for you guys. So much love. Good afternoon. My name is Thomas Giorgio. I am a U.S. Army veteran. I served this great nation from 2002 to 2008, following the senseless attacks of 9/11. During my time overseas and in the military, I served in Baghdad, Iraq, from 2003 to 2005, just outside the Green Zone. My primary role in the Army is as an infantryman, much related to our civilian SWAT officers I worked in the Tactical Operation Command Center, and I was responsible for helping to plan, conduct, and execute raids on enemy compounds, track U.S. forces using real-time satellite imagery, and other fun stuff like that. I'm very proud of my service to my country. I'd like to just kind of step away from myself because I feel really compelled off of Desmond's story, a man that I've just recently learned of and learned from in Florida, as well as David's voice as well about having a space to heal in a traumatized childhood. And I too suffer from a lot of those things. I was raised by a mother who had an 8th grade education, a single mom, no help from my father. She did the best that she could. But I think under the pretense that we're meeting today, I think some history about why veterans do what we do, why we think the way we do, why we're 1% of the population, and me as an incarcerated veteran is even a smaller number of that percentage. Today, I want to touch on a story and experience I had as an 18-year-old soldier in this nation. I want to take you to a time almost 2 decades ago in a land far, far away. The place was set just outside of Baghdad, Iraq, Desert Diyala province, January 30th, 2005. Country divided by a dictator who claimed 100% of his people voted. Yeah, 100% voted for him. The United States was attacked, and we invaded that country due to the purpose of protecting our democracy after 9/11. The invasion was known to the soldiers, sailors, and Marines who I served with as to change the hearts and mind of the people. This, of course, was through an instrument known far too well to the American people, a democratic vote. Iraqis lined the streets for miles, waiting for a chance to establish a representative democracy for the first time in the country's history. Over 11.52 million of the 18.9 million people in Iraq turned out to vote. It's roughly 61% of the entire country's population. Through this instrument, 325 seats were filled by the Iraqi people, representing almost every party in the country. The Iraqi National State of Law and Coalition, National Iraqi Alliance, Kurdistan Alliance, Kurdistan Islamic Union, and other seats were actually carved out for ethnic minorities. The free and open elections demonstrated the sheer democratic power of America's influence, and that voting is a weapon towards tyranny, one that tyrannical governments and tyrannical people should be afraid of. But unfortunately, wherever free citizens are, there must always be a form of suppression to those in power. In Iraq, for the Iraqi people during this time, after voting in a booth in which they'd stood hours in 110-degree temp, they would vote and then dip their finger into a small tub of purple ink that would not wash away for days. Special ink was supposed to last until the end of the elections to verify that you voted. If you had this ink, you could not vote again. Militants loyal to the regime that existed before started targeting the most vulnerable in our society, women, young men, and minorities. They would brutally abduct them into lines and behead them as traitors of the faith, as an honor kill, as they simply tried to become represented in a land that never cared about their voice. As a young 20-year-old kid, not old enough to drink, I patrolled these lines by foot, carrying another instrument of America, my inherited freedom. I will never forget the men and women and children standing in that heat all day just to cast a simple vote. How powerful, how graceful. This is the American democracy that I know. We fast forward to 2014, I became an incarcerated veteran after a choice that I will regret for the rest of my life. I made a snap decision that altered my course in life forever. After serving my debt to society, I learned my mistake and connecting with other veterans who had made similar mistakes in life, and began to see a larger issue that not only faced myself, but other veterans who had been incarcerated. September 2015, I released into a new life and a new learned experience for which I was determined to grow. Now, I would love to tell you all the accolades that I have been through. There are a lot. I'm not going to toot my horn. I'm very proud of the ability to rebuild my life after my incarceration. But the reason I tell this story today, instead of my own personal experiences here in America, is that the Iraqi people directly relates to every single American and their inherited freedoms to vote. Because regardless of of their race, their religion, their creed, their sexual orientation, their veteran status. Every single person in that country voted who wanted to vote. And if I, as a 21-year-old kid, served alongside soldiers, sailors, and Marines who've given this freedom to every single one of our citizens for centuries, then I think our belief, our sacred belief in the right to a representative democracy, regardless of the race, religion, sexual orientation, creed, veteran status, or even incarcerated status that someone may face, that our veterans, my brothers, my sisters, who are not with us today, that's the democracy that I know and should be reflected in America as a veteran.
Thank you, Thomas. I was hoping that you can share just a little bit more about what it means to other veterans, if you've heard anything about, how they've served their country, but are not able to participate in our democracy. And particularly, I think there is some, real problems with not allowing people who've, defended us to be able to vote. And can you share anything else about that?
Yeah, a big portion of this speech that I left out was, my time in prison and my connection with other veterans. I remember telling the panelist group before this that, I remember being in prison thinking I was facing 57 years. As a 30-year-old man, that was literally the rest of my life, although not. With good time, it was literally a death sentence for myself at 30 years old. But as I started to connect with the other veterans inside of the walls, for some reason, I had this perspective, because I had served my country, that I would never be there. And as I got to know more and more people, I was around a lot of veterans, or people who really didn't want to identify as a veteran because of their criminal conviction. And once they had that in-gate date to step out, they basically, as Desmond put it, we're a second-class citizen. We feel the overwhelming honor of our service to our country, and then also the shame of our crime. And the two don't connect. And as I moved through life, showing people, much to what David said, it wasn't a problem. I didn't need to be fixed. I needed to have some time, some space to heal. Because I was one of those veterans, like many that I met in prison, who had their ball dropped for 7, 8 years by the VA after I returned home, and these traumatic experiences as a child, wanting to better my life from the absolutely terrible and traumatic childhood that I had. And I think far too many veterans that I found at the universities, community colleges, and other institutions are just afraid to even report that they were incarcerated, let alone become a veteran. So then they automatically just suppress their natural freedoms to run for office, to vote, to get a good job, because they feel like they more than likely won't obtain the job because they had felony conviction. And that's my experience.
Yeah, thank you so much, Thomas. It's a travesty, and we're gonna fix it, right? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And now I want to welcome Brittany. Brittany, my dear friend, who I've had the pleasure of working with on the Reentry Council. She also worked in the legislature before this, and is just a remarkable woman and friend to all of us, and one of the co-chairs of the Washington Voting Rights Restoration Coalition. Brittany, I was wondering if you could just introduce yourself and share more about your story and your own history with voter disenfranchisement.
Yes, thank you so much, Tara. I'm glad to be here, and thank you all for attending. Where do I start? So I struggled with substance use disorder, and that ended me up in prison. But before that, I was, I guess, how I got into my substance use disorder. I suffered through a lot of racial and sexual trauma as a child, and going through school in a very white community. I grew up with a white side of my family who didn't really understand the trauma that would come along with me being in a very rural white community. And so I was very isolated and angry. And the community of like the community of addiction really pulled me in. There wasn't anyone to deny me. There wasn't anyone to turn me away. It was a welcoming community, right? No one wants to suffer alone. So I found myself there, and I eventually landed in prison. In 2015, I was released, and my reentry was, it was an interesting reentry for me because I came into a family that was very supportive, and I immediately got into school. But where I had always found passion was fighting for the rights of my community, right? I had always felt so isolated and rejected in being a person of color. And I saw that in the rest of my community. I saw that nationwide, right? So my Black community, where I come from, where I identify, we weren't accepted in mainstream society. We aren't represented, and we're rejected a lot. So when I went and met with an advisor for the first time at community college, I sat down and I told them a little bit about my background, about my traumatic history, and about my experience with prison. And then I told them what I was interested in. I was interested in going into the criminal justice system and changing the things that I saw as traumatic and I saw as not working. And the first thing that I was told was, no way, change your mind, change your path. This isn't going to work for you. You're never going to find a position there. So I left there feeling very frustrated and angry, but still committed to going to school and changing my life and creating a good future for myself. I think it was like a year later, and I came across Tara's story, actually, her Supreme Court fight there for her to be able to sit for the bar. And I was inspired. I was like, literally sent it to my mom, sent the story to my mom, and I was like, look, it's possible. Like, I can do this. And so I mean, there was that little bit of hope, right? And I always wanted to be politically engaged. So not having my right to vote really made me feel like an outcast, isolated again, right? My community that I wanted to re-enter into, my community that I was determined to change things for people who might run into the same situations that I did as a child. I was committed to really helping others work through their trauma so that they didn't end up in the same places that I did. So I was committed to my community, despite the things that happened to me and the experiences that I had. So seeing that with Tara, I really, it really gave me a lot of hope. It was around that time that I realized that, because nobody tells you when you re-enter that you will get this right to vote back when you're off community supervision. There is no communication about your rights. There's no communication about really re-entry in general, right? There wasn't for me. And so it was a 2016 election time, and I was not eligible to vote in the primaries. I really felt silenced and not valued as a person in my community while I was working full-time, going to school full-time, and just trying to be a human, right? Just really trying to make it through life and make my mark. And I think it was between the primaries and the general that I finished my supervision, and I applied to get my rights back, registered to vote, and I voted for the first time since, I think, 2008 in the 2016 election. I was, it really took a lot of weight off my shoulders. I was carrying a lot of that trauma and stigma around with me, and it makes you feel not only less than those around you, but like Thomas was talking about, all that stigma, you feel othered, you know, which was it was a common thread throughout my life, that othering. Around this same time, I was taking a class and learning a lot about like American history, and specifically about our racist history. While I had like followed a lot of this in my earlier years, like really diving into it in college and reading like The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, I started to see myself in history and see how valuable I am. And while the racial trauma had like really weighted me down, I started healing when I saw myself in history. So like the fights for voting rights, the civil rights movement, all of those things, like I really felt those and saw how valuable my voice was for my community. And I mean, voting to me, it's representation, right? How can we have a working democracy if we don't have all of our people represented? How are we going to change anything if we don't have people sitting at the table who have been through certain situations? How? We can't. So I just really am excited to see you in these rooms, Tara. I'm so grateful and so proud to know you. Thank you you are a bigger part of my story than you know. So thank you so much for all that you've done, and thank you all.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Brittany. And you are a bigger part of my story than you know as well. And I just appreciate you so much. And I really love how you, talked about reading The New Jim Crow and the civil rights movement, because I will tell you that, I'm the new vice chair of the Civil Rights and Judiciary Committee. And yesterday I was speaking with the caucus and the staff for that committee, and telling them that this is a civil rights movement that has not gotten representation or full attention yet. The rights of formerly incarcerated people, whether it's in voting, employment, housing, so many rights that we need to fight for. And all of this work that we're doing here is, just part of the overall movement and work that we need to continue to do. So I am just grateful for everybody who shared their stories and set the stage for now getting into the policy of what we're fighting for. And I definitely just want to, again, flag that the Washington Voting Rights Restoration Coalition is amazing. And I hope that this coalition stays together after we get this bill done here in the next few months, because this is just the beginning of so much other work that we need to continue to fight for in this civil rights movement that has not yet fully reached the cusp yet. And so, for everybody watching here tonight, I do want to get into some of the details of the bill and tell you how you can help us. This bill has been around for about 3 years now in its current form. Senator Kuderer has been a champion for us in the Senate. Representative Lori Dolan has been a champion in the House. But we needed to get that grassroots organizing together and really, do the education and the work that it takes to make a bill become a law. And so in Washington State, when I first got my first felony conviction in 2001, you did not have your right to vote back until you got your certificate of discharge. And in order to get your certificate of discharge, you had to complete all terms of your sentence, including the payment of legal financial obligations. And at that time, they were giving people thousands and thousands of dollars for something as simple as drug possession. And that's not restitution to a victim. That's just, they were charging poor people to fund the court system. And you couldn't get your right to vote back until you paid every penny of that, plus the 12% interest. And so there was many years where I could not vote in the early 2000s because of that status. Jeannie Darnell, Senator Jeannie Darnell, bless her as well. She's been in the legislature for, I think, 16 or 20 years now. And it took her 9 years to get the first reform passed, which at least brought it back to the point where your right now is provisionally restored as soon as you're off of community custody, as long as you are making payments on your legal financial obligations. You don't have to pay them off in full, but you're, supposed to be making payments and be done with your period of community custody. It took her 9 years to get that through. And in 2009, that became the new law, and that's where it stands right now. This effort is going to bring that law back to the place where we can get the furthest under the Washington State Constitution, which takes away the right to vote, and make it so as soon as you exit 24-hour confinement in prison, your right is automatically restored. No more provisional restoration of your right after community custody if you're making payments. It's as soon as you exit prison, whether you're going to work release, home on electronic monitoring, releasing home to your community, even if you're poor and you can't make payments on your legal financial obligations, regardless of the type of offense that you've been convicted of, if you are outside of the prison walls, you can vote. And this is, really important for all of the reasons that my friends talked about today. It's going to help us, reintegrate into our community, welcome us home. There is absolutely no public safety risk of returning somebody's right to vote. This year, I think we have a much higher chance of getting this through, a higher chance of success for a lot of different reasons. First of all, the loss of voting right is very much tied to racism. This was absolutely done intentionally to suppress the Black vote and to use criminal record as a proxy for race, when we were no longer able to discriminate lawfully based on race. We have come up with a new system of how to discriminate again and create an underclass. And now we use criminal record for that, not just in voting rights, but in so many other ways. The events of 2020 and George Floyd's murder, I hope has evoked an awakening in so many people. I've been encouraged because I've seen some people awakening and doing some self-education about racism and understanding their white privilege and really leaning into that and not getting defensive about it, but getting into the solution. So I have seen that I've been working as an advocate in Olympia for 5 years. I have a lot of friends who are legislators, and I've seen them, going and buying books and starting to do some work, which is really encouraging to me. So I think, we have changed a little bit because of that. I also want to say that last year, this bill died a horrible death on the Senate floor. Generally, a leader of the Senate or the House will not take a vote up unless they know they have the amount of votes to pass the bill, because it wastes a bunch of floor time. And that's the biggest challenge in the legislature is time. How much time do we have? Do we have enough time to hear this bill? How contentious is it going to be? How much time is it going to take? Have you done all the work and the stakeholdering to get it there? And, they thought that they had the votes. But what happened last year is it died in a very partisan debate where, in the Senate, the Democrats did have the majority. The Republicans did not want this for partisan reasons. What I'm hearing is that they really believe that all formerly incarcerated people are going to vote for Democrats, and this is going to increase the Democratic amount of voters. And so they didn't want this for those reasons. And, the narratives that they told on the Senate floor were just traumatizing. I remember sitting there watching it and crying and having to go for a walk. It was like hours and hours of really horrible debate. And this year, we actually have, I'm, running the vehicle that will move in the House, and we have a Republican co-sponsor. And what we are hoping is that is really going to help change things. And that has been the work of this coalition over the last year, reaching out and building relationships with people we might not always agree with on across the nation. Quite frankly, we've partnered with national right of center groups who have really made the case of why this is not a partisan issue. This is a human rights issue. This is a racial justice issue. This is not a partisan issue. And so, you know, I'm very much hopeful that we are going to get this done this year. Also, I want to say, you know, survivors of crime have gotten really upset that last year the Republican Senate members, you know, tried to say that this somehow is disrespectful to victims and survivors of crime. Survivors have come out and said, you know what, survivor groups in Washington state have come out and said, not only are we supporting this, but we're putting this on our legislative agenda. In fact, tonight I'm going to an event by the King County Sexual Assault Survivors Coalition, and you know, they have said we don't want to be politicized, right? Survivors and victims do not want to be politicized. And you know what, we've also done a lot of work about breaking down these binaries, because every single person I know in prison is a survivor. And we when you go and you use survivors to halter criminal justice reform or furthering racial equity, you are actually trying to put and pit two oppressed groups against each other, but we're all the same community, right? We all come from the same kind of backgrounds. And so, you know, I think breaking down that binary around who we are as people, formerly incarcerated people, we're also survivors. And getting the survivors to come out and be in support of this and be our friends and walk down this path with us, getting some Republicans to understand that this isn't a partisan issue, this is a human rights issue, and speak in support. I think we really have a good shot this year. It's also my freshman bill, and so I've definitely asked all of my colleagues in the majority caucus to co-sponsor it with me. And I've let them know, you know, this is my #1 wish, and we have to make it happen. So next steps for the bill. We have a hearing next week. So first week of the session starts, and this is one of the very first bills they're going to hear. It'll be Thursday morning at 10 a.m. We are, you know, working with all of the lobbyists who are on this effort, lining up testimony that'll be compelling to different members of the state government and tribal relations committee where it's going to be heard. I suspect that it's going to go very well, and that we are going to get the bill out of committee very quickly and onto the House floor. If somebody pulls it from rules, which I'm on the rules committee. So I'm very excited. I think that we're going to get this off the House floor very quickly. That's my goal. I'm putting my 100% effort into it. Senator Couderer has also introduced a Senate companion, and she's just holding it there in case something happens, right? We have 6 weeks to get things out of policy committee. And then, you know, if for some reason something happened, you know, she has a bill held on the Senate side to play backup just in case. But we do expect the House version will come over to the Senate, and she is on the state government committee over there in the Senate. So when it gets through the House, it'll go over to the Senate, and then she'll get it in her committee, get it out of there, and get it to the Senate floor. Also, because of everything that happened last year and how traumatic the floor debate went, I know it is the majority leader's personal priority to make sure that this gets done. We've also done a really good job collectively, you know, talking to the senators who were afraid last year and educating them. And I am confident we have the Senate votes this year without any carve-outs. And that's our thing, is that we're doing this together without any carve-outs. So with that being said, we do have time for questions and answers. And I'm hoping that Kelly, Anthony, is Anthony here? Yes, I see Anthony, and Corey are helping to monitor the questions and answers box, and I'm ready to answer any questions, and I'm sure any of our panelists will answer questions as well.
Well, first of all, I'm wondering, I'd actually like to go back to Desmond for just a second, just because I know that, you know, you had this big success in Florida and then they kind of came back. And do you want to just take a minute or two and share kind of what happened as far as what the legislature did? You're on mute. 2020's phrase.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that question, though, Kelly. Yeah, so when we the amendment that was passed basically provided for automatic restoration of voting rights once an individual had completed their sentence. And what the legislature did with the blessings of the governor was they figured that, okay, we need to create what they call implementing language or implementing legislation. And they effectively codified requirements that required a person to pay all types of legal financial obligations that was associated with their conviction. The ACLU and many organizations filed suit after that was passed in July. It was signed into law July of 2019. ACLU and other organizations, they filed suit. They actually won in the lower courts, where the judge basically said that what the legislature was trying to do was create a poll tax, and that a person being poor should never be a barrier to being able to have access to democracy. But the state of Florida appealed, and they appealed to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. And the 11th Circuit actually sided with the state and reversed the lower court's ruling, which meant that out of the 1.4 million people that was initially impacted by Amendment 4, approximately 774,000 would not be able to register to vote because they had some type of legal financial obligation, whether it be court costs or fees, statutory fines, restitution. You know, some folks, you know, I think what we see an average of about $1,000 that people would owe in legal financial obligations, and it goes into the millions of dollars. And so we're effectively looking at least about $4 to $5 billion worth of fines and fees that was owed throughout the state of Florida. What we did was, and how we responded, because our organization always believed that where other people see obstacles, we see opportunities. We actually, in the span of about 2.5 months, raised over $30 million from across the country with over 90,000 donors. And we were able to pay off the fines and fees of a little over 40,000 individuals. And we were able to find those, the remaining 600,000 that didn't have fines and fees. We were able to register some of those as well. And we're continuing that. And then we was also able to use the court system to get these folks in front of judges and get those fines and fees waived. And so that's a program that we've been working for quite some time, and we're still working this now in 2021. And we're going to continue to raise money to make sure that every one of the 1.4 million people, if any of them want to participate in democracy, they would not be forced to choose between putting food on their table or voting.
Great, thank you for that. Let's see. So there's several questions in there about how individuals can best support the bill. I know, Anthony, you want to talk for just a minute about that?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. There are a number of ways in which you can help us support. The first is talking to your legislators, find out who your legislators are and call them. We really need support from especially the east side of the mountains as much as possible, and just letting them know that, hey, this is something that's that we believe in, that we really want, to see passed. And there's a nice nifty app which we can, or website which we can send to you all that has, so you can find your legislator. So we will put that in there. Other ways, you can go to our website, freethevote.wa or freethevotewa.org, which we will also put in our chat function. And we have a social media toolkit, so you can just blast information out there, follow, or put it on there, and, tag Civil Survival or ACLU Washington on it. And those are definitely ways you can do it. And show up. We're going to be having a meeting. We're going to be having a hearing next week, and so show up and just show your support.
Great, thank you. Let's see. We did have a few other questions. I'm wondering, this could go probably to any of the panelists if you want to answer this, but is there anybody on here, one of the panelists, who wants to talk at all about what it felt like to vote for the first time? Desmond?
You must have seen that big smile on my face. No, yeah, it was, I did a lot of crying, I'll tell you that. It was amazing. In August, during primary season for us here in Florida, I voted for the first time in over 30 years. And in November, it was my very first presidential election ever in my life. And but that experience in August was really telling, because it really it was transformational for me. When I was approaching our precinct location, I just couldn't help but think that I was walking on hallowed ground, because there was so many people who sacrificed their lives, shed blood, just so people like me can have the right to vote. And I think particularly in the African American community, that we were beaten, we were hung on trees, we were burned and sprayed with fire hoses, bitten by dogs, to stop people with my skin color from registering to vote and from even going to vote. And to think of all those sacrifices, I walked into that precinct location with a newfound respect. I thought I had respected voting already, but that experience there took me to a much higher level. And it really told me that the act of voting was a sacred act that transcended partisan politics and implicit biases. And it actually takes you to a place that says something so simple, but yet so powerful. And it says that I am. It speaks to your existence as a human being, and it speaks to your humanity. It speaks to the fact that you do have a voice, and your voice does matter, and it can make a difference. And I realized that when I was in there voting, I wasn't voting as a Democrat or Republican. I was voting as a human being, right, with a God-given right to have a say in how my society is ran. And that feeling was so great. It really made me double down on the commitment to the work, because I think that every American citizen should be able to get it, to experience, how sacred that act of voting is, and how much it should be a part of our daily lives. And this should be something that we aspire to do, and not look at it as something that we have to do. That's my story, Kelly, and I'm sticking with it.
Thank you, Desmond. Any of the other panelists want to share?
No, I identify with Desmond so much. You know, I feel that's the reason I told that story about American democracy in Iraq. You know, just something so hollow. You know, as a 20-year-old kid walking around, I had no idea what I was doing. I was just doing the job. And to look back as a 36-year-old man with a 15-month-old son, what grace, what power, and something so simple, and just letting people have their voice. So I just echo Desmond, just the awe-inspiring moment of this is what so many people have sacrificed and give for something so simple.
And I guess I would just like to say, like, the feeling of isolation that I had when I couldn't participate, or when I guess I felt like I couldn't participate in the conversations that were surrounding the 2016 election. There was, I mean, that was the hot topic, right? Everybody was talking about this upcoming election, and I felt so isolated in the fact that I couldn't vote. And like walking around on campuses, people with different initiatives, like, hey, can you sign this? I'm like, no, I can't register to vote. They're like, can you register to vote? I'm like, no, I can't. I don't want to talk about it, right? So the feeling that I got when I was able to cast that vote in the primaries, like, it was so empowering. It was so empowering to have my voice back and to feel like I was a full member of our democracy.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll just share. I think my experience resonates a lot, or it resonated a lot with what Brittany just shared in particular. I also will say I was afraid to even try to find out if I could have my right to vote restored, because I really didn't want to go register with the government anywhere or call attention to myself. And it was just so overwhelming. And it was, you know, every election year, again, you go to the grocery store, you go anywhere, and you have all these people out there wanting you to sign initiatives, and it's like you're reminded, you know, I'm just trying to run to the grocery store every day, and I'm reminded I'm a second-class citizen, and you're reminded over and over and over again that you have no value. So, you know, why do I want to go to my government and ask to have my voice heard when they've already shown me that they don't value me? And so, you know, it wasn't until I went to my first civil survival workshop that I realized I had my right to vote back. And so I think that is really important too, is just the education around that. And so, yeah, we do have one question we have a couple questions now in there. One is, what do you think the effect of restoring voting rights might be on community safety?
Well, I think it's going to be a net gain, right? There is absolutely no loss. If anything, it's going to encourage people to feel, you know, like they're more human, and to think about and get involved in things that are a little bit higher up on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And so I think there's definitely going to be a net gain. I would say, I have never met anybody in all my times incarcerated who stopped to think before they committed a crime that I better not do that today because I'm going to lose my voting right, right? I mean, people, it's not a deterrent. Losing a voting right is not a deterrent. You know, maybe loss of employment, miss your family, miss your boo, you know, all those things, right, are deterrents. But losing your voting right is not a deterrent. So when I thought about this from a policy perspective and arguments from all sides, you know, it's definitely, if anything, it's a net gain in public safety. Definitely no risk.
Sarah, there was some studies done in Florida back in 2011. And basically what these studies show, it was conducted by the Florida Parole Commission, which is now the Office of Offender Review. And it was around, they wanted to know about the impact of civil rights restoration. And what they seen was, and this is their study, in which I love to use their numbers because it's their studies, you know, and so you can't really refute anything. At the time, what they showed was that Florida had a recidivism rate of around 33%. And believe me, that's very conservative. It's really more than that, but they say 33%. And when they looked at individuals in a 2-year period whose rights were restored, and they studied approximately about 40,000 individuals whose rights were restored in a 2-year period, what they found was that when you restore people's civil rights, right, that the recidivism rate actually dropped 22 points to 11.4%, right? Which basically falls in line with criminologists have been saying since the days of Moses, that the quicker you help a person reintegrate back into their community, the quicker you give them a stake in their community, the least likely they are to reoffend. All right. And so when you ask about the gains in public safety, well, if you can do things to create a 22-point drop in recidivism, right, that in itself is a huge bonus for public safety, because now you have, you know, a 22-point reduction in people either reoffending or getting violated, right? Which here's the extra benefit. It actually now saves taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars. And so, for instance, in Florida, when you look at those 40,000 people, which I think it's like, and you had say about I think about 30 something thousand that did not reoffend. Those people who were able to successfully reintegrate represented over half a billion dollars of savings to Florida taxpayers, who didn't have to worry about paying for prisons, didn't have to worry about paying for investigations or even prosecutions where they did get caught, because just the cost of incarceration was about $500 and something million, right? And so it not only increases public safety, but it also relieves tax burdens on the citizens of your state, all right? And it allows you now to reallocate hundreds of millions of dollars that you would have been throwing away. Right now, you can reallocate that to areas of need, such as education, healthcare, infrastructure, or even public safety, right? And so, no, there is nothing but upside to that. And the only political downside to restoration of civil rights or voting rights, the only downside is a political downside, and it's only to people who want to limit who participate in democracy, right? But if you eliminate those people, there is no downside to restoring a person civil rights immediately.
Agree with you. And I think the coalition would really benefit from you sending that study so we can use it to educate lawmakers. So it'd be great to get that from you.
Another question here. What do you think the path is to ensure voting rights, to essentially not take away voting rights? So I don't know, both at like the national and local level. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Tara?
Yeah, I think, you know, the path that we've been talking about with this coalition is that, you know, like this is just a step. And I'm very hopeful that we can get a constitutional amendment. And I think, you know, if we can continue to get bipartisan support, that might be possible because it takes a supermajority to change the Constitution in Washington. And you know, because it is tied to our Constitution, felony disenfranchisement is, I think that is what we're going to have to do. Continue to engage around the human rights part of this, try to, you know, encourage folks to not see it as a partisan issue, and build the support to have a constitutional amendment. A supermajority is required, so 2/3 of the legislature will be needed to do that. And so I think that's the path, and there are states where they don't take it away, and I really hope that Washington can be the next one.
Okay, so we've got another question in there, and then we might want to move to some closing thoughts, Tara. But I work at a juvenile facility with young adults, both adult sentences and juvenile sentences over the age of 18. This year, our juvenile youth were able to vote for the first time. How do you encourage young people to vote and the importance of it? Did we lose Tara?
I'm here, but I don't know if I'm the best qualified person to answer that. You know, that is really the effort of everybody on this call and in the webinar, you know, trying to, you know, for example, in my campaign, I definitely had a whole bunch of interns from the local high school. They're not able to vote yet, but giving, I think, you know, giving opportunities for young people to get engaged in civic activities, whether that's campaigns or other civic activities, bringing them down to the legislature. I saw Miss Karen Vargas was on here. I don't know if she's still on here, but she is a local community leader in my county, and you know, really does a good job of, you know, organizing the youth and giving them opportunities and investing in youth leadership. You know, and the more we can invest in youth leadership in whatever space we're in, and keep giving back and showing young people that their voice matters too, and really including them in decisions. And that's how we're going to get more young people to get bought into the system and actually exercise their rights to vote. So I think that's upon all of us. That's not a policy change, although I think there is some effort to lower the right to vote to like 16 through policy and legislation. But you know, it's more about building community and all of us investing in the youth around us and seeing them for the future that they are.
Great, thank you. So one, I want to thank everybody for being here and joining us tonight. And Tara, do you want to give some closing thoughts?
No, I just, you know, again, just want to say thank you to this community. I absolutely love all of you. And I am so grateful that we found each other because, you know, when I was coming out of prison 7 years ago, we didn't have, you know, I was in isolation myself. And it's only because of you and your strength that I am to where I'm at today. And I hope that all of you see paths for yourselves as well. And whether that's, you know, going to law school or hopefully running for office, because, you know, Desmond always says, you know, let my people vote. I always hashtag let my people run. You know, I'm really honored to have, you know, broken this glass ceiling, but I really hope that other people will see that as a path for themselves too, because it's only when we have people who share our experiences at the tables where decisions are being made that we can really be the change that we all know is needed for our younger selves and for all the people we left behind in prison. And so I am really grateful for this community, for people watching tonight who came out to listen to our stories, for all of you that will be involved in this effort and in future efforts with us. That's it.
And thank you to all the panelists. And I put in the chat Desmond's book too. So I'll just hold it up one last time. It's not signed yet. I'm waiting for that signature, Desmond. But thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Take care. See you soon.